Hi, my name is Sharon Carr. I'm a storyteller based in the Midlands, originally from Canada and living in the UK for a number of years. The story I'm going to tell you is from Wales, from where my late mother came from, based on a true story of a woman who was a skilled and talented quilt maker and who made a promise to herself on her wedding day. Since she'd been a little girl, Miss Nancy Lewis had always wanted to get married. Married to a good man, to be a missus, ring on her finger, and a family she could call her own. She lived with her elderly parents in a little village on the outskirts of the town of Llandilo in Carmarthenshire. And she'd been something of a late gift child, for her parents had been married for many years, and over that time they never expected to have a child until their beloved Nance arrived. Oh, she was the apple of their eyes. They doted on her, and they formed a close, loving little family unit, much loved and much respected in the local parish. Well, Nancy's mother was very good with a needle and thread, very skilled as a seamstress and as a quilt maker. She passed those skills and talents on to her own daughter, Nancy, and over time, any young bride-to-be would want a Miss Nancy Lewis special, a beautiful quilt, a beautiful Welsh whole cloth quilt to form part of her trousseau or to be put in the pine blanket box at the end of their bed. That would only be brought out for special occasions. These weren't patchwork quilts, these were whole cloth quilts. Well, any young man popping the question to his young lady, first question on her mind would be, well, the first request rather, would be, get on down to Miss Lewis's with my mam to put an order in for one of her specials. And there they would find Miss Lewis in her workshop over a wooden frame, over which would be stretched 2 lengths of cloth, where in between would be inserted a batting, a lining of Welsh wool. Now, on the top, the surface of this cloth would be stenciled a design which had been carefully pricked out by a needle. It would be a design like a great big circle, a medallion in the middle. And around the edges and around the sides would be like a filigree of pineapples, fruit, roses, shells, fans. Each quilt maker was known by the design she created. And Miss Lewis's were exceptional, and her stitching was meticulous. And the young woman putting the order in, well, Miss Lewis would be a bit teasing, she'd say, nice young man, is he? And I think the young woman might blush or say, heart of gold he has, Miss Lewis, heart of gold, worships the ground I walk on. So it seems to me, blushing again out of modesty. And Miss Lewis would tease her. But for the next few hours, that young woman and her mother would be oohing and eyeing over the designs, the suggestions Miss Lewis would make, and over the lightness and silkiness of the cloth that she might use. Well, the years passed, and Miss Lewis's parents, being elderly, became ill and took to their beds, leaving their beloved daughter the sole breadwinner. She was a hard worker, working 12 hours out of every 24, and sometimes, broke the Sabbath, worked on the Sabbath, which I'm certain if the local chapel minister had found out, there's no telling what scolding he would have given her. Well, Miss Lewis watched as her friends and her cousins got married over those years, had children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And during that time, her parents passed away, leaving their beloved Nancy all alone. And I'm certain sometimes, sitting there in the parlour on a cold winter's evening with a roaring fire in the hearth, she must have felt the responsibility on her shoulders of that loneliness and the fact that no man had ever courted her or asked for her hand in marriage. And she must have looked into those flickering flames and sighed from the bottom of her heart and said to herself, always wanted to be a missus, to get married to a good man. Would like to have had children, but I'm too old now. Oh. And then, being that pragmatic person she was, she'd shake her head as if to get rid of those thoughts. And she'd say, come on, Nance, no regrets. After all, who would have looked after Mammy or Dadky? Nope, no regrets at all. Besides, I'm too old now. Who would want to marry me? And here I pause the story. Because in this life that we all share, you never can say never. And one Sunday morning in chapel, Miss Nancy Lewis's life changed forever. She'd been late getting up that morning. She'd rushed about getting her breakfast, making the bed, grabbing hold of her bonnet, cramming it on her head, putting the shawl around her shoulders, shutting the door behind her of her cottage and running all the way to chapel. She didn't want to get one of those glares of the minister who did not like anyone being late. She ran up the steps and got in just as the doors shut behind her, slipped herself into the pew, and for the next hour that congregation had the brimstone and fire sermon of that minister. When he'd finished, he said, right, pick up the hymn books, and it's hymn 123. And everybody dutifully did as they were told, opened the hymn books, and were soon singing those hymns in Welsh, the notes warbling up to the ceiling. Well, as they reached the crescendo notes of that hymn, they heard a bit of a commotion at the back of the chapel. And as they closed their books in unison and turned around to see what it was all about, the doors burst open, and there, framed in the doorway, was the huffing and puffing, red-cheeked face, corpulent figure of Mr. Ian Evans, widower and new to the parish. Now, Mr. Evans was a man who just moved into the parish because 6 months before he'd lost his beloved wife Glad after many years of a happy marriage. He couldn't bear to stay in the home they'd shared, and he wanted to start his life afresh somewhere else. That morning, getting up in his new home, he resolved that he would not be late because he too was a man of meticulous timekeeping, and he wanted to get to chapel in good time so he could get to know the congregation and they get to know him. But having set out in good time, he'd gone this way, that way, this way, and soon was lost. So by the time he arrived at the chapel, he could see that the doors were firmly shut, and he could hear the warbling notes of the hymns. Well, he thought to himself, I'll make my apologies to the minister and to the congregation, but I'll slip in quietly while they're singing. So he went up the steps, put his hand on the door handle, and turned it right. It wouldn't budge. He tried left. It wouldn't budge. He tried right, left, right. He put both his hands on the door handle, and he shook the door with such force it burst open, and there he found himself, there, looking at a sea of accusing, curious eyes from that congregation. Well, like a drowning man, he looked for a life-saving, friendly gaze. And he found it in the warm brown eyes of Miss Nancy Lewis. As his eyes locked with hers, he suddenly found himself rippling through like electroshock, an emotion he hadn't felt for many years, and a fluttering in his chest, something he hadn't felt since the first day he had met his beloved wife Glad. Miss Lewis, seeing Mr. Evans for the first time, thought to herself, "Oh, doesn't he look nice? Doesn't he look so cuddly?" And as her eyes locked with his blue ones, she too felt that rippling sensation coursing through her body and that fluttering in her chest, something she'd never ever felt before. And in that moment, the two fell in love. Well, their courtship was swift, because Miss Lewis now was 60 and Mr. Yayan Evans was now 65. After a few months, he put the question, she accepted to become his wife, and on the day they were wed, on the day they came out of the chapel doors, now Mr. and Mrs. Yayan Evans. Well, Miss Lewis, now Mrs. Yayan Evans, number 2, bouquet of flowers triumphantly in one hand, her arm tucked into that of her new husband's on the other. Well, she beamed, and she could see, amidst all the confetti, the shower that came sprinkling over them, she could see all the beaming, happy faces of her friends and family below her. And as she stood there, smiling and waving and chatting, she made a little promise to herself, stood on those chapel stairs. Now that I am Mrs. Yayan Evans, number 2, I promise to myself that I will never ever make another special for another bride-to-be, for now is my time. And Mrs. Yayan Evans, number 2, was as good as her word. Well, thank you so much for listening to my story. It's triumphant, isn't it? I really feel I'm on the side of Mrs. Yayan Evans, number 2. Thank you so much.